They laughed at Samuel Thompson. They laughed at his worn-out boots, his tattered jacket, and the grease-streaked hands that fixed cars no one else would touch. Every day, he stood behind the counter at Tomberg Auto Repair, a quiet, unassuming man who had become invisible to the world. They never looked twice at him. Before we continue the story, comment what city you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications if you enjoy stories like this. He was just the old mechanic who would never amount to anything. But what they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that Samuel was a man worth millions. Samuel Thompson, 56 years old, spent his days in the heart of Dallas, Texas, fixing broken-down cars that no one else had the patience to deal with. To most, he was just another mechanic. To his customers, he was a man who looked like he could barely make ends meet, his clothes threadbare, his shoes worn thin, and his apartment small, dark, and cramped. He ate at the same diner every night, sitting in the corner booth, drinking his coffee in silence while the world rushed around him. No one noticed him. No one ever really cared. He wasn't just poor in their eyes. He was invisible. It was the way of the world, and Samuel had accepted it. He worked, he lived, and that was all. But Samuel Thompson wasn't a man who cared about the things others thought mattered, about wealth, status, or the opinions of those who walked past him every day, too busy to even spare a glance. He had something much more valuable than they could ever imagine. For years, he had carried a secret, an enormous, life-changing secret that no one knew about. He had built his wealth, quietly, meticulously, and then walked away from it all. His co-workers at Tomberg Auto Repair laughed at him. When he sat down for lunch in the break room, they ridiculed him for his old lunch pail and the simplicity of his life. The younger mechanics talked about the cars they dreamed of driving, the homes they'd one day own. Samuel never joined the conversation. He simply smiled, nodded, and went back to work. But they never knew why he lived the way he did. They never knew what he had left behind. And the customers? They were no different. They saw the worn-out face behind the counter and thought little of him. To them, he was just another good old boy fixing their clunkers. Every time he smiled and waved them goodbye, they never saw the depth behind his eyes, the quiet strength of a man who had seen things, who had lived a life of wealth and success that they could never fathom. But there was something about Samuel Thompson that no one knew, something that had been hidden for years, buried beneath the surface. And soon, the truth would come to light, not in the way he expected, but in a way that would change everything for this town, for the people who laughed at him, and for Samuel himself. Samuel Thompson wasn't always the quiet, humble mechanic who worked tirelessly at Tomberg Auto Repair. No, once upon a time, he lived a life most people could only dream of, a life of wealth, power, and privilege that seemed like it would last forever. His name was known in circles of influence, his face in the papers, his business booming. He had everything one could ask for: luxury homes, expensive cars, and a lifestyle others could only imagine. But it wasn't always as glamorous as it appeared. Beneath the surface, there was a deep, gnawing emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Every day, the pressure mounted, and the accolades felt more like chains than accomplishments. The wealth that he had spent his life amassing couldn't answer the questions that burned in his soul. And that's when it happened, the day everything changed. It was a quiet, personal decision that Samuel made one morning when the sun rose over the skyline of Dallas. He had spent countless years chasing what the world defined as success. He had acquired everything that was supposed to bring happiness: the cars, the houses, the prestige. But one morning, after a long night of wrestling with his thoughts, he woke up with a realization so profound it reshaped the course of his entire life. He remembered the words of his grandmother, a devout Christian woman who had always spoken of faith, kindness, and humility. Her voice echoed in his heart, reminding him that the treasures of this world were nothing compared to the wealth of the soul. For years, he had pushed those teachings aside, too focused on his empire to listen. But that day, something in him shifted. He decided to step away from the life that had been defined by material success and embrace something more, something eternal. It wasn't the riches or the luxury that would make him happy anymore. It wasn't the high-end cars or the corner office. It wasn't even the power. It was faith. Faith in Jesus Christ. A faith that transcended anything he had ever known. A faith that offered peace, purpose, and fulfillment in a world that couldn't offer him any of those things. He sold it all. Every last asset, every piece of property, every luxury item gone. In its place, he moved to a small, modest apartment in the city and took a job as a mechanic. A job that would allow him to live simply, to serve others, and to grow in his faith. To those around him, it seemed like he had given up, like he had lost everything. But what they didn't understand was that Samuel had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found peace. But while Samuel walked in faith, the world around him judged him for what they could see on the outside. They didn't know his story. They didn't know the depth of his transformation. They didn't understand that the life he now led was a choice. A deliberate decision to leave behind the fleeting pleasures of this world in search of something greater. And so, they judged him. They overlooked him. They mocked him. They treated him like he was invisible. And yet, despite all of this, Samuel had never been more fulfilled. There was something in his heart that money could never buy. Something deeper, something spiritual, something only faith could provide. His life was no longer about building wealth or pursuing success. It was about serving others, helping where he could, and living humbly, knowing that the treasures he sought were not of this world. But as the days passed, those around him continued to dismiss him. The mechanics in the shop, the customers who came in for repairs, they all saw him as just another poor, middle-aged man, stuck in a dead-end job. They saw the worn-out clothes, the unkempt hair, and the modest demeanor, and they assumed that was all there was to Samuel Thompson. They didn't know his story. They didn't know the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had endured, or the wealth he had walked away from. They saw only the surface, the man fixing cars with calloused hands and a quiet smile. What they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that behind that smile was a man who had once walked among the richest, most powerful individuals in the country. A man who had built an empire. And now, the very empire he had created was nothing but a memory, a distant past that few would ever believe. Samuel didn't wear his wealth anymore. He didn't flaunt it. He had traded it for something far more precious. So, what would you do if you discovered that the poor, old man fixing your car was actually a millionaire? What would you think when you realized that the man who handed you your keys, who gave you advice on how to take care of your vehicle, was a man who had once stood at the top of the world and walked away from it all? What if the person who had been invisible to you, the one you had overlooked time and time again, was hiding a truth so profound it could change everything you thought you knew about success, happiness, and fulfillment? Soon, very soon, the truth would come crashing down. And the town that had once looked down on Samuel Thompson would have no choice but to see him for who he truly was. Samuel Thompson's days began the same way every morning. The soft glow of the early morning light barely seeped through the thin curtains of his modest one-bedroom apartment, yet it was enough to wake him. At 5 a.m., while the city was still silent and most people were still deep in their dreams, Samuel was already up. With a quiet reverence, he would walk to his small wooden desk, open the well-worn pages of his Bible, and begin to read. The words were familiar, comforting. He didn't rush through them. He took his time, reflecting on each verse, drawing strength and peace from the words he had come to rely on throughout his life. After reading, he would close the book, bow his head, and pray not just for himself, but for those around him, for the people he would encounter that day, for the world that seemed so lost in its pursuit of things that didn't matter. It was during these moments that Samuel found clarity. In a world that rushed by in chaos and noise, he had learned to slow down, to listen, to find peace in the quiet stillness. His faith was the anchor in his life, the one constant that had never wavered. It was this faith that had led him to leave behind everything, and it was this faith that kept him grounded, even when the world around him failed to notice his existence. By 6 a.m., Samuel was on his way to work. He walked the short distance to Tomberg Auto Repair, a small shop tucked away in a corner of Dallas where the sound of clanging wrenches and the smell of motor oil filled the air. As he entered, the younger mechanics glanced up, offering only brief nods. They didn't bother to engage with him, as they never did. To them, he was just another old man who couldn't keep up with the younger generation. They laughed at him behind his back, whispered about his quiet ways, and mocked his humble demeanor. When Samuel showed up in his faded flannel shirt and scuffed boots, they rolled their eyes. His slow, methodical work ethic, the one that had built his previous empire, was anathema to the fast-paced, get-it-done attitude of the younger crew. They would rush through their tasks, cutting corners, looking for shortcuts, while Samuel worked patiently, ensuring that every repair was done with precision, integrity, and care. Yet, Despite their mockery, Samuel never responded with bitterness. He smiled, nodded, and did his work, not for the approval of others, but because it was the right thing to do. He knew that his life had a deeper purpose, one that wasn't tied to recognition or worldly success. To Samuel, it was never about impressing anyone. It was about living a life of peace, one that mirrored the values of faith and humility he held so dear. The only person who ever treated him with kindness, who never judged him, was Maria. She was the waitress at the local diner, a small, cozy spot where Samuel often ate his dinner after a long day at the shop. She'd greet him with a warm smile every time he entered, remembering his usual order without asking. He always took his meal black, no sugar, no cream, and she always made sure it was just the way he liked it. It was a small gesture, but to Samuel, it was one of the few moments of kindness in his otherwise solitary existence. Maria never looked down on him. She didn't treat him as the poor, broken man others saw him to be. She spoke to him like he was someone of worth, of importance. She never commented on his worn clothes or his quiet demeanor. Instead, she listened to him talk about life, about the way things used to be, about his dreams and his faith. She treated him like a person, not an invisible figure trying to get by in a world that had long since forgotten him. Maria didn't know Samuel's past. No one did. But she appreciated him for who he was in the present, a man of integrity, a man of peace, a man who lived his life with kindness and humility, and who had a depth of wisdom that went beyond the surface. To her, Samuel was far more than a mechanic. He was a reminder that there was still goodness in a world that often seemed driven by nothing but greed and ambition. As he sat in the diner, sipping his coffee, Samuel often watched the people around him, their faces consumed by the frantic rush of daily life. They talked about the cars they wanted, the homes they dreamed of, the vacations they hoped to take, each conversation focused on what they could acquire, how they could climb the ladder of success, how they could gain more. They laughed, they joked, they worried over the little things, their minds always on what they didn't have yet. Samuel could see it. They were racing towards something, but he knew they didn't even know what it was. They were chasing a dream that would never truly satisfy, chasing after a success that would always feel empty. In his heart, Samuel understood this was not the path to fulfillment. He had walked that road once, and he knew where it led. He had tasted the riches of this world and found them lacking. He had lived in the shadows of power, and he had learned that the true treasures of life were not measured by the size of a bank account or the name on a deed. The true treasure was peace. The true treasure was faith. So Samuel sat there, watching them all rush by, feeling an inner calm in the midst of the chaos. He had something they didn't have. It wasn't money, it wasn't fame, and it wasn't even recognition. It was peace. The peace that came from knowing who you were, from understanding that life wasn't about acquiring things, but about living in faith and trust. They all thought he was nothing. They had no idea who they were really talking to. The man they dismissed as just another old mechanic had walked away from more wealth than they could ever imagine. The world had no idea who Samuel Thompson was. But soon, they would. Are you enjoying this story so far? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Also, check out Uplifting eBooks. You can get them from the link in the description of this video. It was a typical Tuesday morning when the disruption came. A seemingly ordinary day that would soon set in motion a chain of events no one, not even Samuel Thompson himself, could have predicted. The bells on the door of Tomberg Auto Repair jingled as it swung open, and in walked a man dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. His polished shoes clicked against the concrete floor, his designer sunglasses perched on the bridge of his nose. His presence in the small, worn-out garage was striking, almost out of place in the sea of rusted tools and grease-stained uniforms. David Lancaster, a name known to anyone who followed the business world in Dallas. A self-made billionaire, the CEO of a tech conglomerate that had risen to the top of the industry in record time. He had everything that Samuel had once walked away from: money, power, influence. To the world, David Lancaster was a man who commanded attention, a man who thrived on competition, and a man who believed that his wealth entitled him to anything he wanted. And today, he wanted his luxury car fixed. He pulled up to the service desk, his voice dripping with superiority. "I need someone to look at my Rolls-Royce. It's making a strange noise. I expect this to be handled with the utmost care, of course." The young mechanics behind the counter exchanged glances, clearly nervous. This was not just any car. This was the kind of vehicle that demanded expertise, precision, and a level of professionalism that most of them didn't yet have. But there was no hesitation in Samuel's voice when he spoke. "I'll take care of it," Samuel said, his voice steady and calm, without a hint of the awe or fear that the other mechanics might have shown. David Lancaster turned to look at Samuel for the first time, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. He studied the older man, his unkempt hair, the worn-out boots, the faded shirt. There was nothing about Samuel that suggested he had any business touching a car like that. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" David sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You seem like the kind of guy who couldn't even afford to put gas in a car like this, let alone fix it." Samuel simply nodded, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips. He didn't rise to the bait. He didn't need to defend himself. There was no pride in the work he did, only humility. His expertise didn't require recognition, and it certainly didn't need to be validated by a man who judged others by the price of their clothes or the number of zeros on their paycheck. "Just leave the keys on the counter," Samuel said calmly. As David turned to leave, he couldn't resist one final jab. "If you mess this up, I'll make sure no one in this town ever hires you again. I expect perfection." The young mechanics who had been watching in silence now turned their attention back to Samuel, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity in their eyes. They had seen plenty of expensive cars come through the shop, but they had never seen someone like David Lancaster. No one in their right mind would challenge the man's authority, especially when it came to something as delicate as a luxury car. But Samuel wasn't like them. He wasn't intimidated by the name, the power, or the arrogance. He had lived in the presence of far greater men, and yet he had never been swayed by their wealth. It wasn't their money that mattered. It was their character. And from what Samuel could see, David Lancaster's character was as empty as the million-dollar sports car he drove. The moment the door closed behind David Lancaster, Samuel got to work. His movements were precise, deliberate. Each turn of the wrench, every adjustment to the engine, every check of the diagnostics was done with the experience of a man who had worked on every kind of vehicle imaginable. This wasn't just a luxury car to him, it was a machine, and a machine could be fixed with knowledge, patience, and skill. Samuel had no doubt in his abilities. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to do the job right. As he worked, the younger mechanics watched from a distance. They exchanged whispers, some laughing quietly, others watching with suspicion. Samuel was methodical, almost too slow for their liking, but each step he took was calculated, each move designed to get the car running perfectly. Within an hour, the car was running as smoothly as it had when it first rolled off the showroom floor. Samuel had completed the repair with precision, having discovered that a simple misalignment in the exhaust system was causing the noise. No one had expected him to fix it so quickly or so perfectly. David Lancaster returned in the late afternoon, his confident strides echoing in the shop as he approached the counter. "Well?" he demanded, eyes scanning Samuel's work. His gaze flicked to the luxury car in the corner of the garage, and his face shifted. The car was running like it was brand new. The engine purred, smooth and steady. His eyebrows raised slightly, impressed but unwilling to admit it. "How did a broke mechanic like you know so much about cars like this?" David asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and begrudging respect. Samuel looked up from the workbench, his expression calm. He met David's gaze, but there was no arrogance in his response, no need to boast or defend his abilities. There was only truth. That evening, as Samuel sat in his small apartment, reflecting on the day, there was a quiet knock on the door. A letter was slipped through the mail slot, its seal unmarked, its edges worn from travel. Samuel felt a sudden chill as he picked it up. It was a letter that didn't belong in his life, a letter from someone he hadn't heard from in years. He opened it slowly, unfolding the crisp paper inside. The handwriting was familiar but distant, a reminder of a past he had long left behind. "Samuel," the letter began, "you're needed. It's time to come home. The legacy you left behind is at risk. They've come looking for you." A cold shiver ran down his spine as the words sank in. The past he had thought he'd left behind, his wealth, his empire, the choices he had made to walk away from it all, was now pulling him back in. The letter ended simply. "David Lancaster isn't just any businessman. He's looking for something, and he thinks you have it." Samuel's heart raced. He knew that this was no coincidence. The threads of his old life were starting to unravel, and the peaceful existence he had built was suddenly under threat. The truth was coming, whether he was ready or not. And soon, Everyone would learn just who Samuel Thompson really was. The letter sat heavily in Samuel's hand, its contents swirling around him like a storm cloud. He had read it 3 times, but it made no more sense than it had the first time. His mind raced, the weight of it pressing on him as he sat in the dim light of his apartment. The quiet of the room seemed almost suffocating now, the peace he'd once known shattered by the very thing he had tried to leave behind. The letter was from Jonathan Wells, his former business partner, the man who had stood by him through the height of his success and the depths of his fall. Jonathan had been the one to watch as Samuel walked away from everything, the wealth, the power, the influence. He had stood by, baffled, as Samuel sold off assets, moved into a small apartment, and started a new life as a mechanic. To the outside world, it had been a shocking, almost reckless decision. To Jonathan, it had been a betrayal of everything they had worked for. The letter was brief, almost too simple. But Samuel could feel the urgency in every word. "Samuel, it's time. You've been gone long enough. There's something happening, and I need you. The company needs you. The legacy is at risk. David Lancaster is looking for you. He's got plans that you wouldn't believe. You need to come back." It was the last line that hit Samuel hardest. You need to come back. But Samuel knew why he had left. The wealth, the endless pursuits of status, the grind of keeping up appearances, it had all felt hollow. It had all felt so empty. He had found no fulfillment in the boardrooms, no peace in the world of business. The more he earned, the less he felt connected to what truly mattered. He had wanted something more, something real. So he left it all behind, not out of spite, but out of necessity. His faith had led him down a different path. So why now? Why after all these years was he being called back? And more importantly, why had Jonathan waited so long to reach out? Meanwhile, David Lancaster was no longer the man who had walked into Tomberg Auto Repair just a few days ago, dismissing Samuel as a washed-up mechanic. Something about their interaction had stayed with him. Something about Samuel's quiet confidence had unsettled him. A broke mechanic couldn't possibly know as much as Samuel did about a luxury car like his, David had thought. The repair was too perfect, too flawless for someone who, according to his own assumptions, should have no business handling such high-end machinery. David had always been a man who believed in research and understanding the people he encountered. So, he began digging. At first, it was just curiosity, a passing thought. But as he dug deeper, the pieces of Samuel's past began to fall into place. He started with the basics, Sam Thompson's name, his history, his presence in Dallas. But then, as the hours passed, his search took him further back. A forgotten newspaper article from 20 years ago surfaced, a headline that David couldn't ignore. Sam Thompson, self-made billionaire who walked away from it all. David clicked on the link. The article was brief, but it painted a picture of a man who had once been at the peak of Texas wealth, someone whose name was synonymous with luxury, business innovation, and fortune. Samuel had been one of the most respected investors in the state. His companies had spanned multiple industries, and his wealth had been staggering. But the article didn't tell the whole story. It didn't say what had happened after that. It didn't explain why a man who had everything, who could have had more, chose to walk away from it all. David's mind raced as he read. If this was true, and there was no reason to believe it wasn't, then Samuel Thompson was not just any mechanic. He wasn't just a humble, old man fixing cars in a rundown garage. No, Samuel had been a titan of industry. He had been a man who could have been the face of Texas for decades to come. But why was he working as a mechanic? Why was he here, fixing broken-down vehicles in a small, unremarkable shop in the heart of Dallas? David's mind began to churn. He could see it now. The pieces that had seemed disconnected, the man who had seemed like a fool, suddenly taking on new meaning. David had underestimated Samuel, but now he saw the true extent of his mistake. Samuel Thompson wasn't just a mechanic. Samuel Thompson was someone David couldn't afford to ignore. He leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. If this was true, if Samuel really had walked away from all that wealth, from all that power, what did that mean for him now? And what was Samuel hiding? Was he still hiding something? Back in his apartment, Samuel sat motionless, the letter still in his hands. The calm he had once felt seemed to be slipping away, like sand through his fingers. His thoughts were chaotic, his heart torn in two. He had worked hard to build a life that was simple, meaningful. He had worked hard to walk away from the world that had once defined him. But now, it was pulling him back. The letter, the memories, the guilt. It was all too much. He knew Jonathan. He had known him for years. They had been business partners, friends, brothers in arms in the fight to build something big. But somewhere along the way, they had become disconnected. Jonathan had stayed in the world they had created, while Samuel had chosen a different path. He had chosen peace. He had chosen faith. He had chosen to live without the weight of endless ambition pressing down on him. But now Jonathan was asking him to return, and Samuel wasn't sure if he could. He wasn't sure if he was the same man anymore. He had changed. He had found something far more valuable than wealth or success, and it had nothing to do with business. The quiet moments of his life, the work he did with his hands, the simple joy of helping someone, those were the things that mattered to him now. Could he leave all that behind? Could he go back to a world that had tried to destroy him, just for the sake of a legacy? As the night wore on, Samuel stared at the letter in his hands, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like never before. He had chosen his path, but now the world he had left behind was calling him back. And this time, it wasn't just his past, it was David Lancaster, a man with ambitions that could shake the foundation of everything Samuel had worked to build. The clock ticked loudly in the silence of his apartment, each passing second adding more weight to his thoughts. Samuel's life was about to change again, and he wasn't sure if he was ready. But one thing was certain. If this was true, if the man David Lancaster was really looking for him, it was no longer just about Samuel's past. It was about the future and the legacy that had once been his, but was now at risk of being destroyed forever. If this was true, why was he working as a mechanic? David had wondered, and Samuel Thompson was about to find out. David Lancaster wasn't the type of man to sit idly by, especially when there was a mystery to solve. And Samuel Thompson, with his quiet demeanor and hidden past, had become the puzzle he couldn't stop thinking about. The more David thought about the man, the more intrigued he became. A mechanic who had once been one of the wealthiest men in Texas? It didn't add up. One morning, just days after his discovery, David found himself back at Tomberg Auto Repair. The sun had barely risen, and the small shop was still in the early stages of waking up. The sound of engines revving and tools clinking echoed in the stillness of the shop, but Samuel was nowhere to be found. David waited by the counter, impatience gnawing at him. It wasn't long before Samuel appeared, walking in with his usual steady pace, wearing his worn-out overalls and a look of calm. He barely acknowledged David's presence at first, as if he had no idea why the man was back. But David wasn't going to be dismissed so easily this time. David was no longer the arrogant businessman who had come in days ago to have his luxury car repaired. No, something had shifted. There was a hunger in his eyes now, a hunger for answers. Finally, he spoke. "I need to know the truth, Samuel." Samuel paused, placing a wrench down on the workbench in front of him. He didn't look up, his hands still moving with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. David pressed on. "I've looked into you. I know who you were. You were a multimillionaire, a real estate mogul, a business legend. And now you're here, fixing cars? You're telling me you walked away from all of that for what? This? A life in a dusty shop." Samuel's hands stopped moving. The quiet of the room felt thick now, as if time itself had slowed. Finally, Samuel looked up, his eyes calm but heavy with something deeper. The weight of the past was there, hidden beneath the surface, but it was there nonetheless. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he took a breath and turned towards David. "I didn't walk away from wealth. I walked away from the life I thought was everything. What you see now, this is where I found peace." David scoffed, his skepticism clear. "You're telling me you had everything and gave it up for a simple life? No one does that. No one leaves wealth behind without a reason." Samuel's expression softened, and for the first time, David saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something that told him this man had endured more than anyone could understand. It wasn't the look of a man running from something. It was the look of someone who had found a deeper truth, a truth that made everything else feel irrelevant. "There was a time," Samuel began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet weight, "when I believed money was everything. I ran a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. I built it from the ground up, brick by brick. I had everything: mansions, cars, expensive suits, and private jets. People looked at me and thought I had it all. And for a while, I believed them." David, arms crossed, leaned in slightly, intrigued despite himself. But Samuel's gaze grew distant as he continued. his mind seemingly far away, drifting back to a moment in time he had tried to bury for so long. But it wasn't enough. None of it was. I had all the money I wanted, but I didn't have what mattered most. Samuel paused, the pain in his voice unmistakable. It was my wife, Lily, he said quietly, his words slow and deliberate, as if each syllable carried a burden. We were happy, truly happy. Or so I thought. Then, one night, everything changed. David could feel the shift in the air as Samuel spoke. The confidence in his voice was gone, replaced by something raw. The man who had been so sure of himself, who had walked away from everything, was now a man who had faced the greatest loss a person could know. Samuel looked at David for a long moment, his eyes darkened by the memory. Lily died in a car accident. Just like that, gone. It was a rainy evening. She was on her way home from a charity event. And I didn't know she was gone until I saw the police officers standing at my door. It was a nightmare. No one tells you how to survive something like that. There's no guidebook, no step-by-step. It just happens. And you're left to pick up the pieces. David's face softened. He had come to this shop looking for answers, but now he felt a strange empathy for the man sitting across from him. He had known loss before, but he couldn't begin to fathom the kind of pain Samuel was describing. I thought I could keep going, Samuel continued, his voice low and thick with emotion. I thought if I just threw myself into work, if I just kept building, I could distract myself from the emptiness. But every deal, every acquisition, every dollar I earned, it all felt hollow. I was surrounded by wealth, but I was dying inside. Nothing filled the void. And that's when I realized money isn't everything. Success isn't everything. None of it is if you don't have something real to hold on to. That's when I found faith. David, who had been so quick to dismiss Samuel as just another man who had lost his way, felt the weight of his words. Faith. Samuel nodded slowly. Yes. I turned to God. I couldn't fix the pain of losing Lily, but I found peace in knowing that I wasn't alone. And it was in that peace that I found the courage to walk away from it all. The businesses, the power, the fame, it didn't matter. I didn't need any of it anymore. What I needed was something that couldn't be bought. David sat back in his chair, stunned by the depth of what Samuel had shared. The arrogance he had once felt towards Samuel seemed small now, insignificant. This man wasn't just a mechanic. He wasn't just a man who had fallen from grace. He was a man who had found something far more valuable than wealth could ever offer. As the silence hung between them, David couldn't help but ask, "So, why didn't you tell anyone? Why keep it a secret?" Samuel looked him square in the eyes, his voice calm but firm. "Because I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need their admiration. I only need to live according to the peace I've found. That's the truth. That's the real legacy I'm leaving behind." David's mind raced as he processed everything Samuel had just shared. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but something still didn't feel right. Samuel had walked away from everything, but why had he stayed hidden for so long? Why had he kept his past a secret? And just as David was about to speak again, a shadow crossed the doorway. It was a figure he hadn't expected, Jonathan Wells, Samuel's former business partner, standing in the entrance of the shop, his eyes locked on Samuel. The moment was electric. Samuel's calm expression darkened just slightly, his past and present about to collide in a way neither he nor David could have foreseen. And as Jonathan stepped further into the room, David knew that the Real story was only just beginning. The weight of the decision bore down on Samuel Thompson like a heavy storm cloud, suffocating the air around him. The peaceful life he had built, the quiet mornings, the calm evenings, the joy of knowing that his value wasn't measured by his bank balance was now at risk. The life he had chosen, grounded in faith, had been slowly unraveling with every word that came from David Lancaster's mouth. "You're wasting your potential." David's voice echoed in the shop, piercing the silence as Samuel worked on a worn-out truck, the hum of the engine mixing with the tension in the air. "Do you realize what you could be doing? You could be living in a mansion right now. You could have it all again. You've already earned it once. Why throw that away? You've already made all that money. Why not use it?" David's words hung in the air, challenging Samuel's resolve, pushing him to reconsider everything he had come to value. But Samuel didn't flinch. His hands, steady and sure, kept working as they always had. The dirt under his fingernails, the grease on his clothes, the simplicity of his routine, it was all part of the life he had chosen. He knew the truth. True peace could never be bought with wealth, and in all the riches he had once possessed, he had never found the fulfillment he had now in this modest shop. "I've already had it all," David, Samuel said, his voice calm but unwavering. And it wasn't enough. It never was. You can keep your mansions, your cars, and your power. What I have now, what I've found, is far more valuable than any of that. But David, relentless in his pursuit of what he believed was Samuel's destiny, was undeterred. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice laced with frustration. You could change the world with the power you once had. You could make more of a difference than you ever will in that shop. You can't tell me you're happy like this. Samuel didn't answer right away. He simply stared at the engine in front of him, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. It wasn't the first time David had challenged him like this. It wasn't the first time he had been asked to give up his peace for something that glittered more brightly in the eyes of the world. But the answer was always the same. The peace he had found in his faith, in his humility, was worth more than the world's wealth. The quiet mornings spent reading his Bible, the simple conversations with Maria at the diner, the satisfaction of fixing a broken car and sending someone back on the road. It was these things that filled the void left by his old life. He had been rich once, but now he was wealthy in a way money could never match. And it was this wealth he would not trade for anything. Yet, as David's voice persisted in his ears, a deeper conflict began to stir within Samuel. Just as he thought he had settled into this new life, something began to pull at him from the past. A voice, faint but persistent, whispered through his thoughts. Maybe David was right. Maybe he could make a difference. Maybe the world needed him back. And just when Samuel thought he might be able to ignore it, the past came crashing into his present in the form of an old, familiar face. It was Jonathan Wells, the man who had been his partner in the days of his wealth, the man who had once shared in all his victories, and, it seemed, his failures too. Samuel had hoped he would never have to face him again. Jonathan had been part of the life he had left behind. But now, here he was, standing at the door of Tomberg Auto Repair, the same man who had once been his closest confidant, now looking desperate, worn down by time and circumstance. Sam, Jonathan's voice broke the silence. His usual confident air was gone, replaced by a look of genuine desperation. Sam, I need your help. My company, it's falling apart. We're on the brink of collapse. You're the only one who can fix this. For a moment, Samuel just stared at Jonathan, the years of separation and the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Jonathan Wells, the man who had once been part of everything that had brought Samuel to the height of wealth, was now standing before him, asking for his help. It was a request that seemed impossible to ignore, a call back to everything Samuel had walked away from. I can't help you, Samuel said quietly, his voice steady, but there was a hesitation in his Jonathan's eyes widened, but his desperation only grew. You're the only one who can save it. I've tried everything, Sam. I'm out of options. Without you, we're done. You know the business. You know what we need to turn it around. You know how to save this company. Samuel's heart clenched at the words. It wasn't just a business that was on the line. It was people's livelihoods, their families, their futures. And he was being asked to walk away from the simple life he had chosen to return to the chaos, the greed, the pressure, and the distractions of the world he had rejected. There it was, the temptation, the allure of returning to the life he had known, to the power and success that had once been his. He had the knowledge, the skills, the experience to rebuild Jonathan's company from the ground up. He could save it. He could be the hero. He could be the man people looked up to again. But as Samuel stood there, the weight of the decision pressing on him like 1,000 bricks, he could feel something inside him tugging at his soul. Was this a test? Was this an opportunity to prove that his faith was stronger than his desire for success? Or was it a chance to show that the man he had become was truly the man he wanted to be? Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the inner turmoil rise within him. The past was calling him back, but the present, the life he had now, held a peace he couldn't ignore. He wasn't sure what the right choice was, but he knew this was more than just a business decision. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be. Was he willing to trade his peace for the chance to build something he had already left behind? As Jonathan's pleading gaze lingered, and David watched with a knowing smirk, Samuel stood frozen, torn between two worlds. The life he had worked so hard to leave, and the life he had found in the quiet. Was it possible to return to the old without losing himself? Just as Samuel opened his mouth to respond, a familiar voice rang out from the door. Maria, the waitress from the diner, had entered the shop. Her face was concerned, but her voice was steady. Sam, she said, looking from Samuel to Jonathan. "I think you need to hear something." And in that moment, Samuel knew his decision was no longer just his. The choice he was about to make would affect more than just his future. It would affect the very people who had come to know and care for him in ways he could never have imagined. The storm that had been building for so long was now at its peak, and Samuel's choice would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone around him. It was a walk through the past that Samuel had long tried to forget. As he drove toward the gleaming glass skyscraper, the headquarters of his former empire, the weight of the decision ahead seemed to press heavier on his chest with every mile. For the first time in 15 years, Samuel Thompson was about to step back into the world he had so carefully left behind, a world that had once consumed him, that had stripped away his peace, his joy, and ultimately, his soul. The building loomed ahead, an imposing structure of steel and concrete, a monument to the life Samuel had once lived. As he parked in the underground garage, he couldn't help but feel the pull of memories of deals made, of late-night conferences, of the constant chase for more. He had built this empire from the ground up. He had once reveled in its success, its power, the influence he held in the world. But now, as he sat in the car, that old, familiar feeling of emptiness stirred inside him. It was a hollowness that wealth could never fill. Stepping out of the car, Samuel's heart raced, but it wasn't excitement he felt. It was dread. He walked through the front doors, his hand hesitating on the polished brass handle. As soon as the door opened, he was greeted by the sleek, modern lobby, the marble floors reflecting the cold, artificial light. It was exactly as he remembered. The same sterile, polished perfection that had once drawn him in, the same high-end decor that had made him believe that success was measured by the size of your office and the value of your assets. He took the elevator up, the sound of the rising elevator mixing with the echo of his footsteps in his mind. The memories flooded back, the early mornings spent chasing after the next big deal, the late nights in conference rooms, the people who had only ever seen him for what he could provide. Power, influence, money. As the elevator doors opened to the 25th floor, Samuel stepped out, walking past the familiar offices that once belonged to his colleagues. The hallway felt empty now, hollow, the glass walls reflecting an image of himself that felt foreign to him, someone he used to be but no longer recognized. His footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, each step a reminder of the life he had abandoned. When he reached his old office, the door was still there, just as polished, just as imposing. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of the moment pushing against his chest. What was he doing here? Why had he come back? Was this truly a chance to reclaim his past? Or was it simply a cruel reminder of everything he had lost? With a deep breath, Samuel pushed open the door and stepped inside. The office looked exactly as he remembered it. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the skyline stretching out before him, a symbol of the success he had once known. The desk was the same, expensive wood, meticulously organized papers, framed awards, and plaques celebrating deals made, deals won. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. The room looked like the epitome of success, the kind of place that people dreamt of, that they aspired to. But as Samuel walked deeper into the office, a sickening feeling rose in the pit of his stomach. He didn't see the wealth. He didn't see the accolades or the luxury. What he saw, instead, was the greed, the corruption, and the emptiness that had once consumed him. He thought back to the countless nights he had spent here, sitting behind this very desk, signing documents that promised even more wealth, making decisions that affected the lives of countless people, people he had never met, people whose lives were altered by the choices he made in this very room. And yet, despite all of it, there was no fulfillment, no joy, no sense of purpose. All he saw now was a man who had sold his soul in exchange for power. He walked to the window and gazed out over the city below, the lights flickering like distant stars, reminding him of the emptiness he had felt every single time he had reached the top. He had climbed higher and higher, always thinking that the next deal, the next acquisition, the next step would finally bring him the fulfillment he craved. But it never did. He had been chasing something that could never be caught. Suddenly, he remembered something his late wife, Lily, had once told him. "Sam," she had said, her voice soft but firm, "no matter how high you climb, no matter how much you make, if your heart isn't at peace, you'll always feel like you're falling." Her words echoed in his mind, and in that moment, he understood. He wasn't truly rich until he walked away from it all. The wealth, the cars, the mansions, the power, none of it had ever made him feel whole. It had been a facade, a distraction, a lie. But when he left that life behind, When he chose humility, when he put his faith in Jesus Christ, that's when he found what he had been searching for all along. Peace. True peace. His eyes began to well with tears as he bowed his head, overwhelmed by the clarity that flooded his mind. "Lord," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please show me the way. Help me to make the right choice. Help me to be the man you want me to be." And in that moment of quiet surrender, something shifted inside of him. Samuel knew what he had to do. The decision had already been made. It wasn't about the wealth. It wasn't about the power or the status. It was about serving others, about using the blessings God had given him to make a real difference in the world. It was about living for something greater than himself. He stood up, his eyes fixed on the view before him. The city below no longer seemed like a symbol of success. It was just a place where people lived, struggled, and tried to make sense of their lives, just as he had once done. But Samuel Thompson had found his peace. And that peace was worth more than any building, any business, or any amount of money could ever provide. He turned around and walked out of the office for the last time, closing the door behind him, leaving the world of power and corruption in the past. As he walked through the building, the people around him, his former colleagues, the high-powered executives, the ambitious business people, stared at him with confusion. They couldn't understand. They didn't see what he saw. But Samuel wasn't concerned with their judgment. He had already made his choice. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure: he would never go back. As Samuel stepped into the elevator and descended, a deep sense of peace washed over him. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need the approval of others. What he had found in his faith, in his simplicity, was enough. But just as the elevator doors were about to close, the phone in his pocket buzzed. A message from Jonathan Wells. "I don't know what you're planning, but I hope it's the right decision. We're counting on you. This company, it's not just about money anymore. It's about something bigger." Samuel paused, looking at the message. It was a message that would change everything. The decision was made, and Sam felt a sense of calm wash over him, stronger than any business deal he had ever closed. It wasn't about the money, nor the luxury that had once consumed him. It was about something greater, something that had been stirring in his heart for years. In the days that followed, Sam made a bold decision, a decision that shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Instead of returning to the world of corporate power and billion-dollar investments, Sam chose a different path. He took the hidden fortune he had accumulated over the years, the wealth that most could only dream of, and he gave it all away. Every penny. The money he had once hoarded, thinking it would bring him happiness, now became a tool to lift others up. His donations poured into local charities, community outreach programs, and church initiatives. He didn't want anyone to know about it, though. The money wasn't for the recognition. It wasn't for the headlines or the applause. It was for the people who needed it most, the families struggling to make ends meet, the small businesses on the brink of collapse, the communities that had been overlooked for far too long. Sam's heart was at peace, but not everyone shared in that peace. David Lancaster, the wealthy businessman who had once looked down on Sam, was furious. He couldn't understand it. How could Sam, a man who had once been a titan in the world of business, just throw it all away? "Sam," David shouted one afternoon as he stormed into the shop. His face was red with anger, his voice trembling with disbelief. "You're throwing everything away. Everything you've worked for. You were a billionaire. You had it all. And now you're giving it away like it's nothing." Sam stood quietly, the weight of David's words not affecting him the way they once would have. But now, he stood firm, grounded in something much deeper than wealth or power. He looked at David with a calm smile. "I'm not throwing it away," Sam said quietly. "I'm finally giving it to someone who needs it." David's anger flared up. "You think this makes you noble? You think this is the right choice? You're a fool, Sam. You'll regret this. One day, you'll wish you had kept that money. You'll wish you had your mansion back, your cars, your status. What kind of life are you living now?" Sam didn't flinch. He had heard it all before, the arguments, the accusations. But the truth was, none of it mattered anymore. He wasn't living for the praise of men, for the approval of people like David. He had found his purpose, and it had nothing to do with wealth. David's words hung in the air, but Sam didn't let them affect him. Instead, he turned and walked outside. There, in the parking lot, a small crowd had gathered. The news of Sam's charitable acts had spread through the community, and people had begun to gather in anticipation. Sam had no idea how it had all come to this, but he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to do something meaningful. Later that week, a community event was held, an event that Sam had helped fund. It was a day of celebration, a day to bring hope to those who had none. Families who had been struggling to pay their bills, small businesses that had been on the verge of shutting down, local churches that had been barely scraping by, they all benefited from Sam's generosity. The event was a success, and the smiles on the faces of the people who had been helped were enough to fill Sam's heart with joy. The money he had given away had done more than buy groceries or pay off debts. It had restored hope. It had reminded people that they were not forgotten, that they mattered. And there, in the middle of the event, something even more powerful took place. Maria, the waitress from the small diner who had always shown kindness to Sam, was there. Sam had noticed her struggles, how she worked tirelessly to support her children, how she had sacrificed everything for their futures. She had never asked for help, never complained, but Sam had seen it all, and he had made sure that Maria was one of the recipients of his generosity. He walked over to her, his heart full, and handed her an envelope. "Maria," he said softly, "this is for you. I want you to use it for your children. Their education, their future, it's all ahead of them. You don't have to worry about money anymore." Maria's eyes widened in disbelief, and she shook her head. "Sam, I can't accept this. You've already done so much." But Sam smiled gently. "You can, and you will. Your kids deserve the best. They deserve a chance to succeed, to chase their dreams, just like anyone else. Don't let money be something that holds them back." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she took the envelope, her hands trembling. "Thank you, Sam. I don't know what to say. This is more than I could ever hope for." Sam simply nodded. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you've made a difference in my life. Your kindness has been a light in my darkest moments. This is just a small way for me to say thank you." As Maria hugged him, a sense of peace washed over Sam. This was what it was all about. Not the wealth, not the status. It was about serving others, lifting them up, and showing them the love of Christ through his actions. As the day wore on, Sam stood back, watching the joy and gratitude spread through the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt completely fulfilled. The life he had chosen, humble, simple, and full of faith, was more than enough. It was richer than anything money could ever buy. As the event wound down and the last of the families left, Sam found himself alone for a moment, watching the sun set over the horizon. He had made his decision. He had given up everything that once defined him, and in doing so, he had found something far greater. But just as he began to walk back to his modest apartment, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jonathan Wells. "We've been hearing about your donations, Sam. I still don't understand it, but I have to admit, what you've done has made a real difference. People are talking. You've become something bigger than you were. You've touched lives. I can't help but wonder, is there more to this story than we've realized? Are you sure you finished what you started?" The message lingered in his mind, but as the night sky stretched above him, Samuel knew the answer. He had finished exactly what he had started. And whatever came next, he would face it with faith, peace, and the conviction that he had made the right choice. The days following the community event were quieter, but the air in the town felt different. Something had shifted. It wasn't immediately obvious, but it was there, like a subtle breeze that had swept through every street and every heart. It wasn't just Sam who had been changed. The entire town was beginning to see the world in a different light, and it all started with his simple, yet profound decision to give away everything he had once held on to. Sam continued his daily routine, rising at 5 a.m., praying, reading his Bible, and heading to Tomberg Auto Repair with a calm and peaceful heart. His life had not changed in the way most would expect after giving away millions. He didn't buy a mansion or a new car. He didn't seek the fame or recognition that could have come from his charitable acts. Instead, he worked with the same hands that had once fixed cars, but now they were more than just hands doing a job. They were hands that had touched lives in ways far more meaningful than any paycheck could ever measure. Sam had found a joy in his work that wasn't tied to the size of his paycheck or the status he had once held. The work itself, the satisfaction of fixing broken cars, was enough. The people who came into the shop, the ones who had once dismissed him as just a mechanic, now saw him differently. They saw him for who he truly was, not the man who had once been wealthy, but the man who had chosen to live with purpose, with faith, and with a heart full of love. Maria, the waitress, visited the shop every week, always with a warm smile and a kind word. She had paid off her debts, sent her children to college, and had finally found the peace that she had so long sought. Sam often watched her walk into the diner with her children, their lives now filled with opportunity, And it was in these small moments that he found his deepest sense of fulfillment. But it wasn't just Sam who had found peace. David Lancaster, the wealthy businessman who had once scorned him, found himself in a state of deep reflection. He couldn't quite explain it, but Sam's actions had struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in his life, he started questioning the choices he had made. David had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, always seeking more wealth, more power, more recognition. He had told himself it was for his family, for his legacy. But now, standing outside the world Sam had left behind, he began to see how hollow his own life had become. The pressures of maintaining his empire had worn him thin. The people who once celebrated his success now seemed to ignore his achievements, always wanting more, always expecting more. And as David looked at Sam, who had given up everything, David began to wonder if all the things he had worked for were really worth it. The mansion, the cars, the bank accounts full of zeros, they had never brought him true happiness. He had seen how Sam had touched the lives of the people around him, and he realized something fundamental. Success wasn't about how much you could accumulate, but how much you could give. David began to change. He didn't make a dramatic announcement, didn't start. He started running it with more integrity, ensuring his employees were treated with respect, that his clients were more than just sources of revenue. Slowly, David transformed his approach to life, because Sam had made him see that true wealth was never about keeping, but about giving. Jonathan Wells, Sam's former business partner, was also changed. The company he had built with Sam had been on the brink of collapse. He had begged Sam to come back, but when Sam refused, Jonathan found himself at a crossroads. The weight of his decisions began to press down on him, and he realized that he had been running his business with the same mentality that had ruined so many others, greed and self-interest. But now, with Sam's example in mind, Jonathan began to reevaluate everything. For the first time in years, Jonathan looked at his company not as a profit-generating machine, but as a means to do good. He began implementing ethical practices, focusing on fair wages for his employees, supporting local charities, and ensuring that his business was a positive force in the community. He didn't have to sacrifice success to do good. He realized that the two could coexist. And with every step he took toward running his company with integrity, he felt lighter, more fulfilled. But perhaps the most profound change was within Sam himself. He didn't seek accolades or praise. He didn't expect any of it. And yet, the town's shift toward kindness and generosity was a reflection of the impact he had made, not just on them, but on himself. Sam had walked away from everything once, his business, his fortune, his fame, and now he saw that the peace he had found was far greater than anything he had ever known. In the quiet moments, Sam reflected on his life. He knew that his decision to give away everything had not been easy, but it had been necessary. The man who had once been consumed by the pursuit of wealth had died, and the man who had emerged in his place had found true wealth. Not in what he had kept, but in what he had given away. True wealth isn't in what we keep, it's in what we give, Sam said one evening, as he closed his Bible after prayer. The truth was simple, yet profound. He had learned that wealth wasn't just about what filled your bank account. It was about how much you could fill the hearts of others. And in the end, it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the lives that had been touched, the hearts that had been changed, and the legacy of love and faith that he had left behind. The town was different now. People no longer saw wealth as the ultimate goal. They saw kindness as the true measure of success. And Sam, the once forgotten mechanic, had become the heart and soul of that change. As Sam stood by his modest apartment window, watching the sun set over the town that had once written him off, he felt a deep peace. The riches of the world had once seemed so important, but now, in his quiet life, he understood that the true treasures were the relationships he had built, the people he had helped, and the faith he had strengthened. In the end, Sam Thompson had found what he had been searching for all along, not in wealth, not in status, but in the simple, quiet joy of giving. And in doing so, he had changed a town, a community, and perhaps even the world around him. It was an ordinary afternoon when the bell above the door of Tomberg Auto Repair rang. Sam, as always, was bent over the hood of a car, his hands deep into the engine, the familiar scent of motor oil and grease surrounding him. His thoughts were quiet, calm, just the way he liked it. Yet, something about the young man who stepped into the shop caught his attention. He wasn't the typical customer, not the type who usually dropped by for a repair. This man had an air of purpose about him. He was dressed neatly in a sharp, tailored suit, too neat for someone who was simply passing by. His face was young, probably in his late 20s, but there was something wise in his eyes, something that made Sam pause, sensing there was more to this man than met the eye. The young man stood by the door for a moment, unsure of what to say. Sam wiped his hands on a rag, stood up, and brushed the sweat from his brow. "You're looking for something?" Sam asked, his voice calm, steady, though his curiosity was piqued. The young man smiled faintly, a look of recognition in his eyes, before speaking. "My name's Nathan. My mother always told me about the kind mechanic who changed our lives. I just wanted to say thank you." Sam stood frozen for a second. He didn't recognize the name, but the words, the tone, they felt familiar. Something about the gratitude in the young man's voice stirred a memory deep within him. He studied Nathan's face, trying to place him, but nothing clicked. Nathan must have noticed the confusion in Sam's eyes because he quickly continued, "My mother. Maria. She was the waitress at the diner. She always talked about you. How you helped us when we were struggling. How your kindness made all the difference." Sam's heart skipped a beat. Maria. Of course. The waitress who had been a regular part of his life for years. He remembered how she had once told him about the tough times she had endured, how she had been living paycheck to paycheck, constantly worried about paying her bills, feeding her kids. Sam had never shared his story with her, never revealed the fortune he had left behind, but somehow, without saying a word, she had always treated him with kindness and respect. And now, here was her son, standing before him, a successful doctor. Sam had never imagined the far-reaching impact his one simple act of kindness would have on someone's life. He had given Maria enough money to get her out of debt and send her children to college, but to see one of those children now standing in front of him, not just with gratitude but with success, was something he could never have expected. Nathan continued, his voice full of emotion. "Mom passed a few years ago, but she always said you were the reason she was able to get her life back on track. You gave us hope. You gave us a future." Sam blinked, his heart swelling. Maria had passed away? It was a blow, one he hadn't prepared for. But in that moment, he realized something he hadn't fully understood before. His simple acts, the way he had quietly helped Maria, had created ripples that had reverberated through her life and, now, through her son's life. Nathan stepped closer, extending his hand. "I just wanted to thank you. You changed everything for my family. I don't think you realize just how much of an impact you had." Sam took the young man's hand, feeling the weight of those words. His eyes welled with unshed tears, but he quickly blinked them away. His heart was full, overflowing with emotions he couldn't fully articulate. Nathan smiled, nodding. "I'm doing well now, but every step of my journey was made possible because of you. You showed us what it meant to give, to care, without expecting anything in return." Sam's voice was quiet, but his words held the depth of years of reflection. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I believed it was the right thing to do. And seeing you here now, it makes it all worth it." The young man nodded again, understanding the unspoken message that Sam was conveying. Sometimes, the true reward in life wasn't immediate. Sometimes, it came years later, in unexpected ways. Sometimes, it came when you least expected it, when a moment of kindness had rippled outward, changing lives in ways that could never be fully measured. As Nathan turned to leave, he paused at the door. "My mom used to say something else, too. She said that you'd never know how far your kindness would go. She said that you were a living example of how one act could change the world. I believe that now." Sam watched the young man walk away, his heart filled with a profound sense of peace. He had lived his life without the need for recognition or reward. But in this moment, Sam understood something deeper. The small acts of kindness, the ones that seemed insignificant at the time, were the ones that had the most lasting power. The seeds he had planted had blossomed into something far more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. Sam turned back to the car he had been working on, his hands moving with a new sense of purpose. He didn't need to change the world in grand gestures. The world had already been changed, one person, one life, one act of kindness at a time. As he worked, the thought echoed in his mind, a truth that now felt more real than ever. You never know how one act of kindness can change the world. And in that moment, Sam knew that the world, in its own quiet way, had been changed. By him, by his decisions, by his faith, and by the way he chose to live not for himself, but for others. The impact of his actions, though subtle, would continue to ripple through the generations. In a world obsessed with power, wealth, and success, Sam Thompson had shown that the true wealth in life lay in what we gave, not what we kept. And as long as there were people like him in the world would continue to change for the better. As the story of Sam Thompson's life winds down, we come to the final, thought-provoking question, the one that perhaps matters more than any other. Sam chose a life of simplicity, faith, and service. He walked away from millions, from the world's desires, and in doing so, he found something greater, peace, joy, and a purpose that transcended wealth. But now, the question lies with you. If you were Sam, would you have done the same? Would you have walked away from the money, from the luxury, and chosen the path that leads to something more meaningful? Or would you have kept the fortune, enjoying the fruits of your labor, knowing that your success was your own creation? Think about it. In a world where everything is measured by what we own, what if true success wasn't about the numbers in your bank account? What if it was about what you gave, what you shared, and how you lived for others? This is where you come in. We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have followed Sam's path, or would you have chosen to keep the wealth for yourself? Let us know how this story resonates with you, how Sam's journey made you rethink your own. And if you believe that true wealth is found in faith, in Jesus Christ, and in the selfless acts that show love for others, share this story with those around you. Because the message Sam's life carried is one that the world needs more than ever. It's not in fortune, but in faith, that we find true abundance. If you found inspiration in Sam's journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. We'll be bringing you more stories of transformation, hope, and inspiration that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. Thank you for watching, and remember, just like Sam, you have the power to change the world. It might start with a small act of kindness, a quiet decision, or a simple step of faith. Whatever it is, you can make a difference. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep living with purpose, keep believing in the power. Friend, before you go, I'd love to share a message of love with you. Friend, Jesus loves you. He came to save you from your sins and hell. He died so that you can have a close personal relationship with God through him. Jesus came to give you life and purpose. Friend, the best friend to have is Jesus. It doesn't matter what you're struggling with. Jesus came to set you free. Accept Jesus today as your personal Lord and Savior. The Bible says in Romans 10 verse 9 that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, you shall be saved. Say this prayer with your mouth and believe it in your heart by faith, and you're saved. Say, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. I've sinned and come short of your glory. Please forgive me. I believe that you died on the cross of Calvary for me and rose on the third day. Say me, Lord Jesus, give me the grace to live for you till the end. Don't let me fall away. Keep me in your will and sustain me in your grace, in Jesus' name. Amen. If you've done this, welcome, friend. You're now a member of the body of Christ. It doesn't end there, though. Develop a personal relationship with God by praying to Him and reading your Bible daily, and make conscious effort not to go back to your former life. Join a Bible-believing faith church close to you and become a part of the physical body of Christ.